always say Mr, even though some of them have been...
Yeah, you can call me anything you like. Mr. Chairman, Chair, Chairperson, Sir Edward, Mr. Lee.
All right.
Is it time?
Yeah.
Order. Tony Vaughan to move the motion.
It's always a pleasure to serve your chairship. I beg to move that this House has considered e-petition 631412 relating to indefinite leave to remain for healthcare workers. The petition we are debating today was created by Thomas Thelani Mathetho, and this is what his petition says. Healthcare workers are meant to have lived in the UK for at least 5 years before they can apply for indefinite leave to remain. With the work they do and the demand for their skills worldwide, they deserve to get residency status much quicker. Most healthcare workers are working under extreme pressure in the UK. Many countries offer immediate residency status for occupations that are in high demand or extremely short. The UK has been a destination for most foreign nurses and doctors, and it's time for the government to show they care and also appreciate the workers by making some of the restrictions in terms of residency more favourable. This could also reduce the number of care workers leaving the country for other countries that offer better conditions. That is Mr Mathetho's petition. That petition has attracted 52,962 signatures nationally, and before the election the Petitions Committee decided that Thomas's petition would be debated, and that has led to this debate taking place today. I'm leading this debate as a member of the new Petitions Committee. Now, before I get into the issues raised by Thomas's petition, I want to tell you a little bit about his experiences and what has led him to make this petition. I've changed a few aspects of his story. Thomas is a qualified nurse. While living in South Africa, Thomas approached a recruitment agency who were seeking healthcare staff in the UK. He had to sit English exams, and if he passed them, he'd be able to enter the UK to work in the private healthcare sector. The contract was for 3 years. If he left before that, he would have to pay back the exam fees and the flight to the UK, which he understood would have been about £1,500. Thomas passed his exams and came to the UK on the health and care worker visa to work in a private nursing home. He worked mainly as a carer. His contractual hours were 38 hours a week on minimum wage. He was sending money back to his family in South Africa who depended on that money. But after starting work, he found his employer required him to work 20 hours over his contractual hours and regularly worked 60 hours a week. He would work 5 12-hour shifts 5 days in a row. He asked his employer if he could work less, but they refused. He went to the Royal College of Nursing, who told him that he had the right to refuse to do extra hours, but he felt that he was in an impossible situation. If he insisted that he do fewer hours, he was jeopardising his job. And so he did not feel able to seek legal advice about his situation. So after 11 months, he decided to leave. But his employer told him that he couldn't. And if he did, he would be reported to the Nursing and Midwifery Council. They also said he would have to pay £6,000, even though, according to the original agreement, it was only £1,500 if he left before 3 years. He said he would not pay, but they said they didn't care and that he would pay anyway. When he eventually left, they managed to deduct the £6,000 from his new wage packet. Thomas knows of scores of people who have had an experience like his. All of them have accepted those breaches of their contractual and employment rights for fear of jeopardising their jobs. Some had allegations fabricated against them by their employers to justify an abusive dismissal when they refused to accept breaches of their rights. Thomas believes that employers all over the country are abusing the Home Office system for sponsoring workers and are subjecting their employees to modern-day slavery and are doing so with impunity. Thomas's petition is about the qualifying period for indefinite leave to remain. He believes that if the qualifying period for healthcare workers were 2 years instead of 5, the window in which the employee is locked in with their employer when the potential for abuse is the highest is reduced. Thomas's solution to the problem of which he has been the victim deserves careful thought, and I would ask the government first of all to review the qualifying period for those in his position. But what Thomas's awful experiences show is that there are gaping holes in the enforcement of employment rights standards in this country, especially in sectors like healthcare. In a report published this month by the Work Rights Centre, it was found that migrants working in adult social care, who constitute as many as 32% of care workers in the UK, are facing unsustainable working hours, low levels of pay, persistent breaches of employment rights, the fear that reporting their employers to the authorities risks having their visa curtailed, with some employees using the threat of curtailment to silence grievances, and also non-compliance by visa sponsors, that is employers, is widespread, with the most common employment rights breach being unfair dismissal, followed by unauthorised deduction from wages and discrimination. So it's clear that proper enforcement of labour standards is needed urgently. I was encouraged to see that in the Employment Rights Bill recently laid before Parliament by the new Labour government, Part 5 deals with enforcement of labour market legislation. Under the government's plans, an agency will be set up to enforce employment rights, including the national minimum wage, holiday pay, gangmasters licensing and modern slavery. And the agency will consolidate the separate enforcement bodies we currently have, such as the HMRC Minimum Wage Enforcement Team, into a single agency with greater powers, including powers to require information to be given, powers to enter employers' premises and require undertakings backed by criminal penalties. The government hopes that the agency will be a recognisable single brand so individuals know where to go for help and to lead to a more effective use of resources. I think it will be critical for the agency to take a preventative approach by addressing workers' rights violations before they deteriorate to the level of slavery. Workers will also need to be able to trust the agency and come forward, so secure reporting will need to be embedded into it. It makes complete sense for employment rights to be enforced across the board, including alongside modern-day slavery. And I would invite the government to confirm, which is my second question, that this new agency will also police employment standards for those who are subject to immigration control, such as those working in the UK Health under the UK Health and Care Worker Visa. When I spoke to Thomas before this debate, one of the things about the Health and Care Worker Visa that he was most concerned about was being locked in with his employer because, putting the fees issue aside, his visa would be at risk if he left. At the moment, a person in Thomas's position leaving their employment has a 60-day grace period to find a new employer. After that, they are illegally present in the UK. There appears to be no published policy which says that if a person has faced exploitation or fraud by their sponsor, they are given a longer period to find a new job. Other countries have a bridging arrangement. For example, Australia has a migrant worker justice visa, where if somebody finds themselves in a position of exploitation or fraud, the government can support them to leave that. In the UK, where a person does not find a new employer after 60 days and becomes illegally present, there is no way back into the immigration system. That in turn creates a pressure to go into the already overloaded national referral mechanism when this may not be necessary. Another barrier to relieving an exploitative healthcare workplace is that if the worker leaves their main sponsoring employer or are unfairly dismissed, they are not allowed to work in a temporary job while they look for a new sponsor. There is a right to work for up to 20 hours a week in supplementary employment, but not where you leave the main sponsor employer or are dismissed. The right to work up to 20 hours may apply where the employer loses their licence, but this isn't enough to pay bills in the meantime while a new sponsor is found. A migrant justice visa which dropped the requirement to work only for the sponsoring employer in an exploitation situation would remove this barrier to leaving the exploitative situation. So my third question to the government is whether any consideration can be given to providing greater clarity and flexibility on the bridging arrangements when a worker on the health and care worker visa finds themselves in an exploitative situation. In conclusion, we want all workers to be treated fairly, with rights and protections, so that everybody can contribute fully to society without extra hurdles and financial pressures. We want people to be able to contribute in the long term. And it goes without saying that all workers should be free from fear of exploitation. Thomas's petition proposes one way in which these objectives might be addressed. I've asked the Minister about other aspects which might do so. There are many other sides to this debate and there is much more to be said. But I have set the scene and look forward to hearing other members' contributions.
The question is that this House has considered e-petition 631412 relating to indefinite leave to remain for healthcare workers. Jamie Stone.
Thank you very much, Sir Edward. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I rise to speak for a slightly different reason, which is that I have the honour to be the chair of the Petitions Committee, and this is the first debate of the Petitions Committee. And I want to thank the Honourable Member for Folkestone Hythe for an excellent contribution. He describes a worrying, if not harrowing, situation. And I also want to put on the record my thanks at this early stage in the life of the committee, Sir Edward, to the members who've joined it. And their enthusiasm is really most encouraging. And I also could not continue without saying also that we've been hugely impressed by the work put in by the clerks and all the team who give us the presentations and so on. And I'm going to keep my remarks very, very short, Sir Edward, because we want to hear the proper detail about this particularly harrowing issue. But I want to end by saying that, to my mind, the work of the Petitions Committee is very important, and it has a very high hit rate in terms of people, members of the public, who watch it and go into Hansard to see what we said. And it strikes me that that's an important part of the way we do democracy in this country. Sir Edward, I will conclude my remarks with that. Thank you very much.
If you wish to speak, you have to rise in your place. Sojan Joseph.
Thank you, Sir Edward. It is a pleasure to see you in the chair. I congratulate my honourable friend and constituency neighbour, the member of Folkestone Hythe, for his excellent speech in introducing this important debate today. As members will know, before being elected as to represent my home constituency of Ashford in July, I had spent the previous 22 years working in the National Health Service. As someone who has also made a journey to work in the NHS from a foreign country, I want to draw on my knowledge and set out in my short contribution why I support the e-petition and would back reducing the time that a foreign healthcare worker have to wait from 5 years down to 2 before they qualify for indefinite leave to remain. I would make the point that since I came to the UK in 2001, the rules have changed, and people who have the same aspirations as I did now risk finding themselves excluded. As we all know, the NHS is reliant on overseas workers. The NHS workforce survey in June of this year showed that just under 30% of NHS staff in England reported having a non-British nationality. However, without proper incentives to both recruit and retain those workers, the employment deficit is likely to worsen. For example, in the years to June 2022 and June 2023, more nurses from the European Union and the European Economic Area left the NHS than joined. Similar picture for healthcare workers from the rest of the world. In June 2022, 4,702 healthcare workers left the UK, and in the year 2023, this was 6,610, and in the year June 2024, 7,957 workers left UK. The cost of recruiting and training an overseas nurse is anywhere between £50,000 and £70,000, while for a doctor it can be roughly £250,000, only for them to be tempted away by other countries with more attractive recruitment and retention policies, such as Australia and Canada. As the cost of living crisis has worsened over the past decade and a half across the country, especially in the southeast, where my Ashford constituency sits, stagnating wages and rising costs have not been good incentive to keep staff in the NHS workforce. This is also impacting patient care. Losing experienced staff is a big loss for NHS. It takes 12 to 18 months for the managers and the matrons to train a newly joined staff member, and losing them in 2 to 3 years' time is a big loss for the hospitals. So given these factors, we must rethink our retention strategy as a whole. Keeping skilled workers in the United Kingdom, especially those who have received large government investment, is a vital step towards keeping our NHS alive and making it fit for the future. Therefore, granting healthcare workers indefinite leave to remain after 2 years rather than 5 will be a necessary measure to solving the retention crisis identified by Lord Darcy in his recent independent report into our NHS. By making a special case for healthcare workers and allowing them to make this country their permanent home after 2 years would also show how important the role they have taken within the NHS is, and how we as a nation are grateful to these workers for the decision they have made to come to the UK and choose to train, learn and work in our healthcare sector. Thank you.
Order. I should say that it is against the rules to work on a laptop while attending these debates. Satya Kaur.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I would like to thank the member of Folkestone High for securing this important debate following a petition on this issue in which my constituents of Southampton Test contributed the most signatures to. The fact that over 500 signatures came from Southampton does not surprise me. We are the home to the largest hospital in the region and have a number of care homes, pharmacies, GP practices and more that local individuals and families rely on every day, but would not exist if it wasn't for the incredible hard work of healthcare workers from around the world that keep our NHS going. For me, supporting overseas health workers is not only the right thing to do, but also the most practical to ensure we have an NHS fit for purpose once more. Southampton has welcomed people from around the world for centuries. It has made us the great place we are, talented, skilled, resourceful, diverse, and so much more. Healthcare workers play an invaluable role in not only ensuring we get the care we need, but also within our local communities too. Many spend their spare time volunteering within our neighbourhoods. So it's heartbreaking to see the statistic from the RCN that 2/3 of overseas workers are considering leaving because they are struggling and cannot get access to support. Too many, especially those working at Southampton General Hospital, are sadly victims to hate crime also, something I have personally witnessed with horror, when they are the ones, sometimes in the most pressurised circumstances, playing their part to save thousands every single day, nursing our most vulnerable and caring for our loved ones when there is no one else to do it. Those that choose to come to us and keep our most treasured asset, our NHS, alive, those that give all they have to care and help others within our local communities, should be valued, be able to put down roots, find a sense of belonging, and at the very least be able to call this great country in which they are giving so much to, including their taxes, their home. On a more practical level, we all know that our NHS is on its knees. I am proud of the clear, much needed investment made by this Labour government in the NHS during the budget, but we all know that more needs to be done. Recruitment and retention is the biggest problem facing our local hospital and other health providers. Of course, we know this means reform, but the plan rightfully to improve opportunities and access for homegrown talent through the government's new NHS workforce plan is welcome. However, I think it would be a mistake to take for granted the huge contribution that overseas health workers make to our NHS right now and the contribution they will always be making. We are losing health workers at an unprecedented level, with those within the sector warning of a mass exodus that will cripple our NHS. We are failing to keep this talent and are missing out to other countries giving much more attractive offers. So, if we want to keep our NHS alive and ensure it can thrive once more, staff, whoever they are, wherever they're from, must be valued and supported. I am grateful to every NHS worker. You do incredible work, sometimes in the most challenging of circumstances. Yeah. You are already playing your part for our country and deserve to be able to call this place your home sooner. While I understand the government's position, I hope more can be done to support my residents who this impacts and healthcare workers more widely. Thank you.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Sir Edward. It's a pleasure to serve under your chair, and I want to thank my honourable friend, who I'm delighted to follow, always a very keen champion for Southampton and the NHS, and also thank the honourable member for Folkestone and Hythe, who has brought this to this meeting. We have a petition, we have a proposal to bring eligibility for indefinite leave to remain for migrant carers down from 5 to 2 years. And only a few months into being an MP, I'm always delighted when you see solutions and proposals rather than a regurgitation of some of the problems. So really, for me, it comes down to what are the problems that this proposal really is intending to solve. There's a concern behind this petition that we're losing migrant carers once they're here. There's a concern that we're losing out on migrant carers to other English-speaking countries. There's a concern that without the migrant carers in our country and those who may come to our shores, the NHS, as we all know, in its worst crisis in a generation, is going to fall over. Well, the NHS is undoubtedly in perhaps the worst situation it's ever known. That's partly a consequence of the vacancies that the NHS is carrying. There are many other reasons too. And to put the NHS on a firmer footing, we do need to fill these vacancies. We need to fill them urgently. We need to fill them more urgently than the timescales for training and recruiting new NHS staff will allow. And so migrant workers, de facto, will be a part of the temporary solution to our workforce problems. And in that spirit, I particularly wanted to commend the NHS carers who are supporting patients in my constituency of Bournemouth East, and particularly at the Royal Bournemouth Hospital. A full 24% of the workforce at that hospital are from a global majority. This is a far higher percentage of staff from that majority than reflected across Dorset. 477 are Indian, 530 are African, 273 are Filipino, 71 are Pakistani, 29 are Nepalese, 31 are Sri Lankan. And as I saw when I was at the hospital recently, that really is reflected in the spirit of care that you've given to patients. So I want to commend everybody who is contributing to our NHS wherever they come from. It's also great to see the Indian population in Bournemouth growing, and I've been to some of their recent celebrations, and they are so proud to serve in our NHS, and I want to commend the work that they do. But on the whole, we should recognise that migrant working will be a temporary solution. We must urgently start the longer-term and sustainable solution of training and recruiting and retaining a domestic workforce. The NHS is the largest recruiting employer in Dorset. However, accounting for 6% of all vacancies in 2023, the NHS and the care sector face significant skill shortages and recruitment difficulties. The long-term workforce plan predicted that the workforce would need to grow by 2.6 to 2.9% a year, with 71,000 to 76,000 allied health professionals. Clearly, that's an enormous number that has to be met. The plan identifies shortfalls in the number of allied health professionals, namely paramedics, occupational therapists, diagnostic radiographers, podiatrists and speech and language therapists. Clearly a wide range of professions where there is a gap. And this shortfall is due to the education and training pipeline not keeping pace with the demand that we all knew was coming. And that, my honourable friends, is a casualty of 14 years of Conservative government. Clearly, we need to open the number of local people employed in health and care careers, and the Dorset Integrated Care Systems People Plan outlines this as a priority, and I commend that plan for this. We must also open the minds of young people to roles in health and social care before their career choices are made, and we must make apprenticeships an attractive career pathway for a wide range of people, including those that would normally choose higher education. Indeed, the long-term workforce plan identifies that more than a third of these AHPs could train through apprenticeships, and here I want to commend Health Sciences University, Bournemouth and Poole College and Bournemouth University, who are excellent education providers, and with more support from government in the form of funding and frameworks, could clearly do so much more to train the carers of the future from within our communities. We all know that a larger domestic workforce is the future. We know that education and training investments are key, but because we haven't done this, we have an urgent workforce gap to fill. Migrant workers can be a part of the solution to fill this gap and to put in place the means to avoid significant vacancies in the future, but it begs the question of whether policy levers need to be pulled on and which those levers are, and whether there's a concern that we're losing migrant carers once they are here, whether because they choose to leave because of the cost of living crisis or other reasons, or because they choose not to come here in the first place and go instead to other English-speaking countries. In making the decision to require migrant healthcare workers to qualify for indefinite leave to remain after 5 years rather than 2, and making no immediate changes to existing policy, the government is taking a view about whether it needs to encourage migrant carers to come or stay in the UK. As I see it, the government had at least 3 other options in relation to this petition and the need to fill gaps in our workforce urgently. First, it could have agreed with the petition in its full scope. Second, it could have done something around eligibility but not delivered the full scope of the petition. It could have brought eligibility for indefinite leave to remain down from 5 years but higher than 2 years. And third, it could have done nothing with eligibility but something else to further encourage migrant carers to fill the gaps in health and social care. So whether in the course of time government does create new policy levers and pull on these to encourage migrant workers to serve in our NHS, there is one key thing we must be bearing in mind, and I will close with this. We must make sure that all future planning around workforce is happening effectively and at the place-based level. Here we need our integrated care systems to be mapping vacancies, projected vacancies, understanding where carers will come from, whether it's through apprenticeships and training or from overseas. And we need to be planning the healthcare, education, housing, transport and other infrastructure necessary to support any increases in population at a local level. This is particularly important because when I was knocking on doors during the general election and the months beforehand, it was very clear that behind every single door there was a feeling of hopelessness. A feeling that nothing improves, nothing gets better, the problems are too big to fix, nobody has done anything for so long. And so if we do not put in place the right frameworks and funding, if we do not fill the gaps in our healthcare workforce at the moment and put in place that longer term sustainable trajectory to a filled workforce, we are storing up yet more problems. We are creating yet more hopelessness. And I would therefore encourage government to obviously do all it can to support the NHS now on life support by filling those gaps in workforce, but to do all it can to support colleges and universities in my area and elsewhere to make sure that we've got those workers of the future.
Yeah. Anybody else wish to speak? Sarah Russell.
Thank you, Sir Edward, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And thank you very much to my friend from Folkestone, honourable friend from Folkestone and Hyde, for asking for this debate. There is a significant and ageing population in my constituency. There has been a 25% increase in the over 65 since 2011, and accordingly a huge increase in the need for care for people. Prior to coming here, I was a solicitor specialising in employment rights, and I worked in a law centre, and I have seen firsthand how this plays out when it goes wrong, and it does go wrong. So what typically would happen is that we would be approached by a care worker who was very concerned that they were being treated horrifically at work and in ways that were very clearly unlawful. Unfortunately, though, once we gave them some advice, they wouldn't then go forward with any form of complaint because they were too frightened that they would lose their visa status and their employer would create untrue allegations about them to have them thrown out of the country, rather than actually deal with the underlying problems in the care sector. The Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority reports that 61% of all reports made to it in Q1 of 2024 were concerning labour abuse in the care sector. There are many, many people working in the care sector in my constituency, and there are many, many more who are spending their life savings on care. And all of them would be rightly horrified to either experience or be receiving care from people who are working in the sort of circumstances that I saw firsthand in practice. On the Gangmaster and Labour Abuse Authority website, it lists common signs indicating exploitation of care workers and asks that if you are visiting a loved one or your loved one is receiving care at home and you spot these signs, please contact us. The common signs that they list are scavenging for food or eating leftovers, working excessively long hours, not being dressed adequately for the role, so either in insufficiently warm clothing or not having PPE, being in fear of the authorities, showing signs that their movements are being controlled, or having injuries. This is the reality of working in care work in this country. This is what we are all accepting day to day in order to have our older people or people with disabilities looked after. I would suggest that many of us would find that idea completely abhorrent, and that whilst we continue to do nothing, that is what we are perpetuating in our society and all around us. So there are two things that potentially I think we could do around this. There's obviously the subject of the petition today, but irrespective of that, even with a 2-year wait for rights, there needs to be a look at the relationship between employment rights and visa status in the intervening period, because actually that first 2 years would still be subject to widespread abuse. The other thing that we could be looking at is that the Gangmaster and Labour Abuse Authority licensing scheme doesn't currently extend to the care sector, and it seems to me that that is a very significant omission that we could be reviewing. So thank you very much for listening to me today. And the last thing I'd like to say actually is to pick up on the point made by my friend, who's the Honourable Member for Southampton Test, who talked about hate crime against NHS workers. And when I visited Congleton War Memorial Hospital recently, it was actually a point that was raised with me by the Chief Executive, that actually his staff are habitually and regularly subject to racial hatred. So I'd like to echo her thanks to all NHS workers and all of our care staff, and again raise this issue with the House because it really is appalling and we need to do something about it. Thank you very much.
Liberal Democrat spokesman Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to the Petitions Committee and to the Honourable Member for Folkestone and Hythe for bringing this debate today, and it really is a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, Sir Edward. It's an honour to speak today on a matter that's deeply important, not just to those who signed the petition, but to every single one of us who relies on the dedication and compassion of healthcare workers. We should be really clear about the immense contribution healthcare workers make to the UK. These individuals form the backbone of our communities, tirelessly offering their time, skills and empathy to ensure the well-being of those in need. And every single day, they save lives, and in doing so, can risk their own. They also face mounting pressure, whether from record waiting times in the NHS or staffing shortages in care homes. And other members have mentioned hate crimes in their own constituencies, and I've had a horrific incident over the weekend of exactly that in my own constituency. And I completely agree with the comments made in that regard. And so what do these healthcare workers get in return? They get a system that makes them jump through hoops and can leave them vulnerable to exploitation, as we heard very clearly through Thomas's story about the power that sits with the sponsoring employer rather than the healthcare worker themselves. These workers deserve better. They deserve a system that recognises their sacrifices, recognises their contributions and recognises their humanity. The Liberal Democrats have long championed better support for healthcare workers from around the world, because if we want to continue benefiting from their dedication, we must treat them with respect, not as mere cogs in a machine, but as valued members of our society. And to us, the first step in ensuring that healthcare workers have the resources, support and respect they deserve to continue their essential work is reversing the utterly cruel decision made by the last government to ban those on the health and care worker visa from bringing their dependents with them. This policy places undue burden on workers who are already sacrificing so much to support our healthcare system and sends a clear message that our government does not value them. By overturning this decision, we could take a vital step towards returning compassion. So I urge the government to exempt NHS and care staff also from the £1,000 a year immigration skills charge. This fee, imposed on employers who recruit workers overseas, places an unnecessary financial strain on our already stretched healthcare system. At a time when the NHS and care sectors face significant workforce shortages and mounting demand, charges like these are unproductive. We must also address the exploitation of migrant workers, a problem particularly acute in the social care sector. Many of these workers face long hours, low pay and isolation from their families, a situation only worsened by the decision to ban dependents. The Liberal Democrats are committed to tackling this head-on. We're calling for a single enforcement body to crack down on modern slavery and worker exploitation. This was promised by the previous government, but unfortunately, it didn't seem to materialise. However, while reforming policies for immigrants working in healthcare is essential, the long-term solution surely lies in a robust workforce plan that invests in training and retaining our own talent, and that was mentioned by the member for Bournemouth East. If the previous government had paid care workers properly and valued them as skilled professionals, it wouldn't have needed to bring in tens of thousands of care workers from abroad. The Liberal Democrats urge the government to produce a long-term workforce strategy to focus on addressing those skill gaps that exist within the UK through increased training and education opportunities, and for relevant government departments to work with employers in each sector to address their specific needs. We've also called for a carer's minimum wage to make it easier to recruit British workers to these vital services on which our country relies. The previous government didn't do this, but I urge this government to revisit these proposals. And there's a central point to be made here. The UK's visa system is broken. It's not fair, it's not fit for purpose, and our economy, with it our public services and our people, most importantly, suffer for it. The Liberal Democrats are committed to building a system that is fair, practical and humane, one that recognises economic realities, values families and enables our workforce to meet the needs of this country. We need a flexible, merit-based visa system that reflects the actual needs of our economy, one that considers skills, qualifications and demand for expertise, not an arbitrary figure that is forced to fit across all industries and sectors. And a key part of this flexibility should be moving work visa policy out of the Home Office, which has repeatedly shown it doesn't understand the needs of employers, and it should be placed under the responsibility of departments better equipped to address workforce challenges. By doing so, we can ensure that policies are designed with a deeper understanding of sector-specific challenges and a focus on supporting economic growth and service delivery. The UK's immigration system is not working for too many people. It fails healthcare workers, it's failing employers, and it fails all of us who rely on vital services. The Liberal Democrats have a plan to fix it by treating healthcare workers with the respect they deserve, cracking down on worker exploitation and building a visa system built on merit and real workforce need. We'd urge the government to start delivering a system that actually works for healthcare workers, for the NHS and for the entire country.
Opposition spokesman Alicia Cairns.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Edward. And it's always a privilege to debate issues brought to us directly through petitions. And I would join my honourable friend, Keith Ness, in thanking the Petitions Committee for all the work they do, particularly the clerks. Indeed, they are currently fortunate to have Rahul Sindawi within their team, who was previously my Speaker's intern for a year, and he is very much missed, but I'm delighted that he's gone on to find another role within Parliament. In today's debate, it's been good to hear about the wide range of work that health and social care workers do on a daily basis. They are integral to our communities in supporting our loved ones during a time of crisis and for our beloved older ones. I'm deeply grateful for the work they do. The issue today brought to us highlights the broad and interconnected nature of immigration, a policy area with influences far beyond the remit of the Home Office. Among them, few areas feel the effects more acutely than those affecting our health workforce. And that workforce is a vitally important matter. The previous government understood the importance of developing a strategy for the NHS workforce that extended beyond parliamentary cycles, taking into account its long-term impact. Under our proposals, we aim to reduce reliance on international recruitment agency staff. Our report stated that in 15 years' time, we expect just 9 to 10.5% of our workforce to be recruited from overseas, compared to nearly a quarter now. This shift towards a homegrown health workforce is contingent upon implementing education and training expansions as set out in our plans. I'd be grateful if the Minister can confirm this target remains and what steps the Government is taking to achieve it. In Government, we created the Health and Social Care Visa to facilitate the entry of top global health professionals into the NHS, aligning with the needs of both the institution and the country. Within its first 3 years, over 61,000 people had taken it up. And I would also like to clarify that health and social care workers are exempt from the immigration health surcharge. So that would not be a new proposal by opposing parties. That is the current existing policy. We should discuss the basis for achieving indefinite leave to remain and why it matters. The standard requirement of 5 years is designed to allow applicants to build ties and demonstrate an ongoing commitment to the UK. In sponsored work routes, settlement relies on applicants having worked in their sponsored role for 5 years. Other requirements include demonstrating an adequate level of English, and this is essential so that individuals can properly integrate into our communities. Integration is a crucial element of settlement. Delving into the definition of integration is a complex topic, and I wouldn't want to test the patience of the room on that matter. However, the data available is clear that migrants' English language skills and labour market outcomes improve over time, giving them more opportunities to shape their own futures. And that is also something that benefits both society as a whole. Now, whilst there are some limited circumstances where individuals can apply for accelerated settlement, most routes leading to permanent residency require an individual to have done those 5 years. To me, and I'm sure to many others, this represents an appropriate timeframe for people to build ties to the UK and their local communities. I'm not convinced by the arguments that 2 years over 5 years somehow reduces the risk of abuse and indeed slave labour within the system. There are many things. We must ensure that work standards are appropriate, and there are many routes for victims of slave labour to receive protections, for example, the National Referral Mechanism. However, it is quite fair that if you cannot find another role within the UK, that your visa would no longer be valid. But we did a lot of work when we were in government, Sir Edward, to crack down on fraudulent social care companies who were using this visa route to bring people to this country without social care jobs for them to go to at vast numbers. And so we have to recognise that whilst the majority of people who apply to come work in this country using the health and care worker visa are coming here for the right reasons, many companies were abusing this route, and that is why we've had to put in additional restrictions around it. It's important to note that the rate of settlement in this country is managed thoughtfully, ensuring those who successfully integrate have the opportunity to remain here indefinitely. Contrary to the opening speech, individuals can undertake additional paid work on a health and social care worker visa as long as they continue in their sponsored role. They can also engage in unpaid voluntary work. This again helps them identify alternative routes to employment should they be unhappy with their sponsor. As many members will be aware, grants of settlement have generally increased since 2016, although they remain below the level seen in the early 2010s. Whilst there was a slight decrease in 2023, it was still the second highest year for grants since 2013, with 119,000 granted. So could the Minister kindly set out the Government has considered what level of settlement grants it anticipates in the coming years and how it plans to ensure they remain sustainable? Because all of us here appreciate the work of healthcare professionals, but it is, in our view, a reasonable timeline for 5 years to achieve indefinite leave to remain. It ensures those who do come to make their homes here permanently have the time to lay down roots, to fully integrate with their neighbours and local community and demonstrate commitment to our country. As with all visa policy, it is vital we find a balance between ensuring robust protections against misuse, trust from UK residents and citizens in its fairness, and the rights and prospects of those coming here to make new lives and contribute. The current time for indefinite leave to remain is the correct one and should not be shortened. Is this also the view of the Government, and are there plans to either review or change the eligibility criteria for indefinite leave to remain? Ultimately, we welcome the ongoing discussion around this issue, but indefinite leave to remain is a serious status, and 5 years reflects the seriousness of that and the opportunities that indefinite leave to remain offer by being in this country. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Sir Edward. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship and to thank and congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Folkestone and Hythe, for securing this important and informative debate, and indeed for the work that he and colleagues across the House now are doing on the Petitions Committee. And I'm grateful to him and to colleagues that have taken part today. I want to just start by saying that I totally agree with the sentiment that I think has been underlying so many of the contributions, that everyone should be able to work free from fear and exploitation, and there should be absolutely no place for hate crime or sentiments for anybody anywhere in the country. And I am sure that all honourable members across this House take those issues extremely seriously. And I do want to say that on a number of the issues raised, including tackling the exploitation that we see on this route, ensuring a preventative approach, ensuring trust, making sure that there are ways in which people have escaped from if they feel locked in with their employers, and many other issues I will be addressing in my remarks this afternoon. And I want to thank honourable members from Ashford, Southampton Test, Bournemouth East, Congleton, also the opposition spokesperson from Hazel Grove, and indeed the Conservative shadow spokesperson for their contributions today. The Government does recognise the vital contribution which health and care professionals from overseas make to our NHS and in social care, and indeed to the wider health and well-being of the United Kingdom. And indeed, the Honourable Member for Ashford speaks with great personal experience, having been here and working as a nurse. And indeed, I know that he and I will want to congratulate our mutual friend, B. Joy Sebastian, a critical care nurse who has recently been elected as president of the Royal College of Nursing, a true example of how there is a contribution to our wider health sector that is incredibly important as well. Honourable members will be aware that in 2020 the previous government introduced the health and care visa, which recognises the crucial contribution international healthcare workers make, and this government has kept that offer. The health and care visa provides significantly reduced fees, visa fees as well as a dedicated Home Office team to process applications. Most applicants can expect a decision within 3 weeks of enrolling their biometrics. And health and care applicants are also exempt from having to pay the immigration and health surcharge. These benefits apply not only to the main applicants, but also to their dependents. And I hope is a sign of how much we also value the role that those coming are making to our health and care services. And we do believe that the United Kingdom's offer to health and care professionals continues to be strong, competing with other countries and attracting health and care professionals who may want to work overseas. But it is also important in that context, and this has been a contribution made by a number of honourable members, that we do need to look at net migration overall. And under the previous government, we know that net migration trebled in 5 years, driven by a big increase in overseas recruitment. Our government is clear that net migration must come down, and we are committed to tackling skills shortages and labour market failures here in the UK to support that effort. That's why the government's approach is also to link migration policy and visa controls to skills and labour market policies, so that immigration is not used as an alternative to training or tackling workforce problems in the UK. And this will be important in terms of making sure that we also have opportunities to gain new skills and access to these very important jobs as part of enabling the government's broader agenda. Now, whilst I appreciate the arguments around granting health and care workers settlements after 2 years, the system must be fair to all users. And that's why I would be concerned and why it would not be right to allow health and care workers to qualify after 2 years when skilled workers, including those in other much-needed sectors with global demand, would need to wait until they had completed 5 years on a work route before they are eligible to apply for settlement. Settlement in the UK is a privilege, and it isn't an automatic entitlement. In settling the qualifying period, the government has to balance what is fair to all applicants, whilst with ensuring that they are able to continue the skilled work that they have been issued a visa for, and which often aligns so much with their passions, and in this case with the deep compassion that so many will be bringing. And indeed making sure that it is for a reasonable length of time, as well as recognising the potential impact on public funds of granting settlement sooner. On balance, the government considers that 5 years is the right length of time for people to demonstrate a reasonable contribution to their sector, as well as to their commitment to the UK. That's why we do not have any plans to reduce the length of time that health and care workers or other skilled workers need to complete in the UK in order to apply for settlement. I know there have been some examples. For example, France offered fast-track citizenship during the COVID-19 pandemic for frontline workers in 2020. Other countries have offered short-term visas for roles in demand sectors. Now, the French offer appeared to go wider than those just in health and social care, and it does appear that the scheme is no longer operating. So there are examples of where there can be short-term changes, but that they may also come to an end. But it is right that we tackle the issues that are underlying the sentiment behind the petition today, which I think were very powerfully outlined by my honourable friend, the member for Folkestone and Hythe. And I do want to tackle some of those, particularly on displaced workers and exploitation, in my remaining remarks. Now, the question has been asked about what the government is doing to be able to more effectively tackle some of the exploitation we've seen. And I think it's worth laying out some of the protections that are now in place. As of March 2024, it is absolutely right as well that there was a change that meant that with sponsor guidance amended so that sponsors could only would need to be carrying out need to be registered to be carrying out regulated activity and registered with the Care Quality Commission. The Home Office has continued also to act against unscrupulous sponsors and has highlighted bad practices to the sector. The Home Office continues to share concerns and intelligence related to bad practice, and since July 2022 has revoked 452 sponsor licences in the care sector for reasons including underpayment of salary and failing to provide workers with enough hours to maintain salary levels. For those individuals who have had their employer's licence revoked, the Home Office has established a joint venture with the Department for Health and Social Care and directors of social care operating in regional hubs in England, whereby the Department for Health and Social Care have funded a process for the hubs to find alternative employment for those who have found themselves in this position, and further information can be found on the government website. This has been implemented on an exceptional basis because of the exploitative practices that have been identified in the sector and to provide protections to victims of these. Concerns regarding potentially unethical and illegal employment practices should be reported to the Gangmaster and Labour Abuse Authority, who will investigate fully, and information on reporting these issues can be found on the GLAA website also. I think it's also important to make the point about how we need to have a single enforcement body, and I think that's been raised by colleagues across the House. The government has set out in the plan to make work in its plan to make work pay a significant and ambitious agenda to ensure employment ensure workplace rights are fit for a modern economy, that they empower working people and deliver economic growth, and introduced its bill on the 10th of October 2024. And it is important that we talk about this in the context of improving rights and protections for all workers. It is also important to make recognition of workers wanting to change employer because of exploitation, where it may be that their employer hasn't lost their sponsor licence. Any worker on the health and care visa is able to seek alternative employment provided they have a job offer from a Home Office approved sponsor and to make a new application. They are free to do this at any time and do not need their employer's permission to move jobs. We strongly encourage health and care visa holders who think they are being exploited, whether this is concerns about pay, working rights or working hours, to come forward and report those concerns to us using the Pay and Work Rights complaint section on the government's website. But first and foremost, any worker also who believes that they may be in danger should also contact the police. If a migrant working in care has left their job because of exploitation, they should contact their regional support offer so that they can help them try to find alternative employment. And this includes people who have yet to have their visa cancelled. I'll just make a final couple of remarks before I close, Mr Edward. Just to say that in the context of the protections, some of the protections that we do have in place and the ability to move employer, the government does not have any plans to extend the period of time allowed to workers who have lost their jobs, as this could leave them unable to work to support themselves for longer, increasing the risks of destitution or that they become trapped in illegal working situations. It is also important to recognise, I think, as a point that has been made by honourable members, including honourable members for, I think, Congleton and Bournemouth East, that staff retention in the care sector remains a long-standing issue which the sector does need to address. This is why we are committed to ending long-term reliance on overseas recruitment through linking our migration, skills and labour market policies that I have already mentioned. But it does include improving working conditions and bringing in workforce and training plans for sectors such as the health and care sector. That's why it is important that we've introduced the Employment Rights Bill and are looking at the Fair Work Agency becoming a single enforcement body, but I recognise that there is still much more to do. In relation to removing care worker care worker access to the immigration system, the government does continue to monitor the immigration system and act to stop exploitation being perpetrated in the care sector. We do not plan to make any changes to the immigration system at this time, but will act if needed. In closing, I do want to offer my thanks, Sir Edward, to the Honourable Member for Folkestone and Hythe for securing this valuable debate, and indeed to all who have spoken. There is no doubt that the importance of health and care staff who are in all of our constituencies and sectors that support all of our communities is a matter on which members from all sides of this House care passionately about, and that's been demonstrated by the discussion that we've had today. I can assure members that we will reflect very carefully on the discussions and the points that have been raised in this afternoon debate, and will continue to do all that we can to ensure the safety of and support those in our health and care sector. Thank you.
Tony Vaughan to sum up.
Thank you, Sir Edward. This debate has underlined that the UK desperately needs care workers from abroad, and as I said earlier, at present it's about 33% of our care workers are from abroad. Yet they are leaving in their thousands, as other honourable members have pointed out. They're also being exploited while the system does not currently enforce labour rights. All the while there is a recruitment crisis in health and social care. I'd like to declare an interest. My mother worked as a care worker for decades before she retired 2 years ago. She came from the Philippines in the 1970s and worked as a carer in the NHS and in nursing homes. And I know from her experiences that the work was hard. I know that it's not a chosen career for many younger people. And I thank and congratulate everybody who works in the care sector to provide that vital public service. I completely agree with what was said by others as to the need to encourage apprenticeships and improve conditions and not treat immigration as an alternative to training. The reality is that at the moment that 33% is what is required in terms of taking carers from abroad, and a lot of work needs to be done to make sure that the care profession is seen as something that is attractive to those who are not already working in it. I welcome the acknowledgement of the government as to the prioritisation in tackling exploitation. I welcome the enforcement actions my Right Honourable Member Minister has outlined in terms of enforcement of labour standards. I wonder whether there is a sort of another way of doing it so that there's an ongoing level of contact between the Home Office and employers, so that non-compliance by employers can be addressed before breaches become so serious that only revoking the sponsor licence occurs. That could avoid various other employees being essentially left out in the cold and losing their jobs. And it may be, and I would hope, that the Fair Work Agency would provide the powers and the resourcing and the enforcement officers to see to it that there is ongoing contact, so that this sort of extreme step of revoking sponsor licences is not the only tool in the box. I note the point made by the opposition spokesman about 20 hours. My understanding is that if somebody is in a situation of exploitation and they lose their job either by termination or resignation, that the immigration rules are clear that they are not allowed to work at all in the 20-hour period. And so that barrier to leaving an exploitative situation is a very real one. But But I will finish up by thanking everyone for their contributions in this debate, and thanking particularly the petitioner, Thomas, for putting himself out there and requesting this petition. The number of people who've signed it is obviously showed that it's an issue which is of great concern to many, many people, and I hope that this debate today has given him some reassurance that our system has considered this issue carefully, and I would encourage everyone to continue using the petition system, which is a great way of participating in our democracy. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered e-petition 631412 relating to indefinite leave to remain for healthcare workers. Many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.